All right, well, so Jonathan and I are just kind of hanging out, getting started. If you're just coming in now, take the poll. We've got this question up. Are you using any AI-powered tools to find qualified prospects and or qualify leads? And we'll talk about this in a couple minutes after we get started. I know, Jonathan, I mentioned to you when we were starting exploring AI, one of the early things we did was AI for lead scoring. And it was kind of nascent at the time, like that the tools weren't that advanced yet, and it just didn't work for us. And in retrospect, there's a lot of reasons why it didn't work, but I'll be fascinated to kind of get your perspective as we're talking later on in this event about lead scoring and the ways we can apply AI. But yeah, that was like, I feel like when I talk to people, a lot of people think about that lead scoring and lead qualification as an early use case for AI. So I think this is just such a timely topic for people.
Well, I'm excited to share. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, no, this is great. All right, well, we're at the top of the hour, so people are still rolling in. Welcome if you're just joining us. If you want, I'll leave the poll up for about another 30 seconds or so. So if you want to take that as we're going, and Jonathan, if you want to kind of go ahead and advance and get us rolling here, I'll stop this poll now, and I'm going to share these results kind of as we're talking. So it looks like we've got, are you using AI powered tools to find qualified prospects, qualified leads? 70% said no, 13% said yes, and 17% said not sure, which is actually a fascinating answer to me, because I think what's happening in the space today is a lot of people are actually using AI functionality or tools, and they don't even know it, which is actually the ideal state of where we want to get with marketing and sales. The AI is just infused into everything you do, and you don't realize it, kind of like in your personal life where you use a voice assistant or you use Google Maps or you use Netflix and you don't think about the AI. That's where we want to be in marketing and sales, but we're nowhere close to that yet in terms of maturity in the market. So I'll stop sharing that poll for now. But so again, just welcome to today's webinar. Our main goal today is to answer this question: how can AI help you find ideal prospects faster and generate higher quality leads at scale? And I am your host. If you don't know who I am, I'm Paul Raetzer, the founder and CEO of Marketing AI Institute, which is a media, event, and education company that I started in 2016. And this is Jonathan Spear. Welcome, Jonathan, again.
Thank you.
And Jonathan, like me, hates the long form bio that we do when we do events. So I'm just going to give you kind of a quick snapshot on Jonathan. And then Jonathan, you can kind of give us some more flavor as we're going through. But he's been involved with numerous tech startups as founder, CEO, investor, mentor, and advisor, including 7 years as co-founder and CEO of NetBase Solutions, which is a leader in the social media analytics space. His passion for building companies and teams that make a difference in the world most recently brought him to LeadCrunch as CEO in February of 2021. There's our short form bio for the day. And then quick agenda. So I'm going to take about a minute up front and give you a little background on the Marketing AI Institute if you're not familiar with us. We'll go through Jonathan's talk. We'll be active in chat and Q&A as we're going. So if you have questions or any technical issues, don't hesitate to reach out. Our team's online with us to help out there. And then I'll be kind of curating and moderating the questions later. So we'll save most of the Q&A towards the end, plenty of time at the end for that. But if you have something really timely related to something Jonathan's talking about at the moment, don't hesitate to throw that in the panel, and I'll try and keep an eye on that and hit him up with that right as we're going. So the Marketing AI Institute, again, I started in 2016, and the basic premise was just to see if other people were interested in the topic like me and people within my company were. We were trying to figure out what is it and what is it, the potential for it. And so we started it with this idea of how do we make this approachable and actionable? How do we make AI make sense to the average marketer was really the mission we set out with. And this monthly webinar series, which is what we're doing today, is one of the ways that we do that. So we bring together leaders, top tech companies, and we put on educational information, give people a chance to talk with the people who are building and helping people grow businesses with this software. And down at the bottom there is a bit.ly link where you can go grab, there's about 15 or 20 on-demand webinars with companies like Drift and HubSpot and Trust Insights and Pandata, and just some incredible stuff there that's free and on demand. And then just a little bit more background on the Institute. So about 23,000 website users per month, about 24,000 subscribers to the Institute content. We held our first Marketing AI conference in 2019 with about 300 people from 12 countries, 50 speakers, 60 sessions. It was just an incredible event. I miss that live in-person thing, like probably all of you do as well. We will be back to that in 2022, but this year we're going to be in virtual, which I'll talk about in a moment. And I did raise $1 million seed round to really accelerate the growth of the Institute this past fall. And then, as I mentioned, Marketing AI Conference is coming up September 13th to the 14th. We have keynotes including Cade Metz from the New York Times, author of Genius Makers, and Karen Howe from MIT Tech Review, she's just amazing. Her work in the space has just been incredible, especially in the last couple of years. So it's a great opportunity to really learn more, to understand pilot and scale AI. There's a code down there, and I'll mention it again at the end, but you can learn more at macon.ai. And then big picture, the way we think about AI and what it means to you is that every study on AI says it's going to have trillions of dollars in impact on businesses and the economy. And yet our own research and research we've seen from other institutions states that we're basically at the beginning of all of this. As much hype as there's been about AI, the reality is that most marketers, most salespeople don't have a clue. They don't understand what it is. They don't know how to apply it to their organization, how to adopt it and scale it. And that's really what we're trying to do here. We want to help you grow smarter with AI, which is the final slide in my talk here. But the whole premise and what we're going to talk about with LeadCrunch is this idea that, and Jonathan, you could go to the next slide here, is this idea that AI is just smarter technology. Like if you're buying sales software, CRM, automation, email marketing, content marketing, advertising, whatever it is, if it doesn't have AI in it, then you're not buying the most advanced technology that's available that can help you do your job faster, better, cheaper. And so think about AI as smarter marketing technology. And by having that smarter technology, you can grow your business. You can reduce costs. You can accelerate revenue better than your peers. That's the competitive advantage that exists. So that's all I'm going to say from my end. I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan. I'll be here to moderate and kind of jump in every once in a while. But Jonathan, take it away.
Fantastic. Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. And I'm a huge fan of what you're doing at the Marketing AI Institute, and glad to be sharing and talk about growing smarter with AI. I recently picked up the book Upstream by the great Dan Heath, and if you haven't checked it out yet, it's really relevant to what we're talking about today, because it's really about solving problems before they happen. And the book starts with an old story by Irving Zola. It asks you to imagine, you're hanging out on the shore of a river, and maybe you're having a picnic, you're enjoying a sunny day, and suddenly you look over and you see there's someone in the water, they're in the river, and they're struggling. Maybe they're going to drown. Like a lot of people, you jump up and you rush into the river and haul them out. You'd save them. And you do that because it's the right thing to do, and you have helped someone and probably feel good about yourself as well. But of course, it's what you do. But imagine you do that. You jump in, you haul someone out of the water, and right at that moment, as you're kind of about to take a little breath and relax, you see another person out there. What would you do? You'd probably jump right back in the water. What if the second time you're hauling the second person out of the water, and all of a sudden there's another person there also drowning, and you just again and again it keeps happening. The story that this book Upstream asks you to consider is, sooner or later you got to wonder what's going on upstream. Who's up there doing what that's causing all these people to be in the river drowning, and how can you solve that problem at the source before waiting? And there's a lot of real life examples in the book of where this happens in business. One of the ones that really grabbed me was Expedia. In Expedia, they were doing a lot of customer service type issues, and they were feeling good about themselves every time they were saving a customer that was struggling with some kind of issue. And they were doing it again and again, and the customer service department's growing. They're adding more people. They're responding. They're getting good reviews. They're feeling good about themselves for this work they're doing. But no one was really asking the question, how come 80% of orders, literally 80% of customer orders, were requiring a reach out to customer service? There was an upstream problem that needed attention. And due to the nature of our organizations and the way we're in functional groups, it's interesting because often we miss those kinds of problems in the first place. We focus on the problem in front of us and don't see what's upstream. But second is there isn't always an owner. And who's supposed to go fix that problem? So what I want to talk about today is the upstream problem that we see in sales and marketing. So if we talk about sales and marketing, we have to start the conversation with this guy. And this guy could be in sales or marketing. He could be an AE. But for today, for the purpose of this conversation, I want to call him an SDR, sales development rep. Because if there's one function in our companies that we tend to just throw into the river, a sink or swim function, it's the sales development rep. This guy has a really tough job. His job is to go open brand new doors, find brand new prospects. We've closed some good customers. Who's the next best prospect that we can get in the door that will convert into being a great customer for us? And there's some things we know about this guy. First is he's pretty young. On average, SDRs have 1.2 years of work experience, 1.2. That means he's Gen Z, real, fresh out of college. His name is probably Aiden, right? Or if he's a she, his name's probably Madison. This is a young person. And his job, the nature of his job is to go out and hunt, but then he tends to get beat up all the time because either sales or marketing, if he doesn't find the right prospects, either one of them can beat him up. And it really is a sink or swim job because 60% of the time, these guys don't make their quotas. It's exactly a case where an upstream solution is needed. There's something we have to do before this guy's drowning, and that's really what we want to talk about today. So if we look at upstream and what's upstream for the SDR, you have to look at the evolution of the entire Salesforce automation space. Because if you look at SFA over the last 25 years, what strikes you pretty quickly is the amount of innovation and new tools that have come along for every level of the sales funnel. And modern SFA sort of started with Salesforce coming on the scene as 25 years ago, and we started to get really good at managing our deals that are in funnel. And then we got better at managing the mid funnel with the Eloqas and the Marketos of the world. We started to figure out how to nurture leads and keep an engaged prospect in the funnel. More recently, with tools like Outreach, we've gotten better at engaging a customer that might be interested. But what's really interesting is this area above the funnel, the area where that SDR really spends a lot of his time hunting, is remained pretty much exactly the same for the last 20 years. And what do I mean by that space? It's really answering the question, who should we talk to next? Who could we even talk to in the first place? Who's the next best prospect? That question today is pretty manual. It's a lot of guesswork, kind of hunting and pecking. And there aren't tools to help answer that question yet today. It's the area where my company LeadCrunch lives, and we'll talk more about LeadCrunch toward the end. But that's really the above the funnel space is what we're addressing today. So I think it's worth taking a second to look at why the SFA solutions have not addressed the above the funnel solution problem so far. And it's interesting because if you go back and look at the last 50 or 60 years in software development, it started with these mainframe solutions, figured out that information could be digitized. in this big first wave of software. And then the whole client server revolution, the 80s and 90s, we started saying, that's great, we have digital information, but gosh, you shouldn't have to be able to code a computer to be able to use it. And more recently, in the 2000s, these horizontal SaaS solutions have come along, which let really anyone use a work function, a process from anywhere on any device. And if I summarize, almost 60 years of software development into a couple slides, what I'd say is we have taken a giant pile of paper that we all used to interact with, whether that's receipts or purchase orders or just your personal notes on every sales interaction. And we've turned that into digital information. And that unlocks huge efficiency gains. Sort of the big three for all business software has always been efficiency. Software that's faster, cheaper. It's visibility because you have now insights and history and searchable information. And it's control. Companies want a consistent process that everyone in the company uses. So again, the big three: efficiency, visibility, control, or put another way, faster, better, cheaper. That's what we've worked on for 20 years. But something interesting, and Paul mentioned this right to begin with, is faster, better, cheaper is not necessarily smarter. And the great VC, Mike Maples at Floodgate Ventures, who I've had the good fortune of working with in the past, he talks about this. He said, if you have an old business process and it's a stupid process, then you go ahead and put software around it. You don't get a smart process. What you get is automated stupid. And unfortunately, that happens a lot in software. What's exciting now is we're at the beginning of a new wave, the fourth wave. And it should be absolutely no surprise here on a Marketing AI Institute call, what we think that wave is, which is artificial intelligence. And I love this slide for it on so many levels, this picture. First of all, it's absolutely impossible to find an AI slide that doesn't have a robot in it. And to me, that really indicates, exactly where we are in the hype cycle for AI. There's this old line that in the short term, we overestimate the impact of every technology, but in the long run, we underestimate it. And I think that's where we are right now. In this hype cycle, it's all robots doing math on chalkboard, which is kind of just bizarre on a lot of levels. But what I want to do is take a second to demystify, to Paul's point also, that we're already using AI in a lot of our functions, but we don't necessarily have a common understanding or description of it. So I want to demystify a little and talk about how I think about AI, and then return to talk about AI above the funnel. So when I think about AI, what I think about first and foremost is pattern matching. And I think of all the ways that AI is already being used in pattern matching today. If you've received your COVID shot, then you were benefiting from AI, because the way we found and sequenced the genetic sequence of the virus, along with the way we identify variants, everything else, that is using AI for pattern matching. If you used your phone today to check your news feed on any app at all, which I'm sure you did because we all do that, then you used AI, because AI is what's telling you the next article you should read. It's what's telling you who your friends ought to be. It unlocked your phone in the first place with the face recognition. And more often, AI is pervading the devices we use every day, like our vehicles. The AI in the Tesla shows up in a bunch of places. It's the auto driving that we think about, road avoidance, obstacle avoidance on the road. But it's also the map and the navigation that tells you, based on this time of day, based on road conditions, what we think is happening, here's the best way to get from point A to point B. So as we get back to talking about AI above the funnel, I think the actual first insight is that we're living in a world of connected information. These days, the amount of information that companies put out leaves breadcrumbs everywhere. There's information about what companies do, about what their products are, uh, based on their own websites, PR they put out, job postings, people's information that is on LinkedIn or everything else. Every time someone asks for an employee that does a certain set of things, you're learning about the company and what they do. And with all that connected information, if we look above the funnel, there's a question you could ask, which is, how would an AI look at the prospecting problem, or the problem above the funnel of finding the next best prospect? And the answer is something we call exographics. So I'll explain for a minute that, based on what we've always had access to. As marketers, as sales prospectors, as SDRs, what we've always leveraged is something called firmographics. It's the easy to access information. It's the company's size, their industry, revenue, and so on. The problem is that too many companies look identical using firmographic filters. So for example, if you're trying to sell a software product and you're selling to Caterpillar and John Deere, using firmographics, those companies look identical. They're firmographic twins, same basic size in revenue, Fortune 100, same basic size in employees, and same industry. With AI, what we're able to do is unpack a deeper signal that exists in all those breadcrumbs from connected information online. For example, deciphering whether a company is an early adopter of new technology or a mid or late adopter of new technology. Are they a company that heavily uses the cloud, or a company that prefers not to? A company that has a B2C focus, or a company that doesn't. Caterpillar really tends to focus on industrial, selling, where Deere has much more of a consumer focus. All that information is knowable now online with these different breadcrumbs. It's just really, really hard for a human to do it. So you ask the question, first of all, is that useful information? And you have to say yes. Which company do you want to call on, Cat or Deere? It depends on what you're selling. If it's cutting edge breakthrough technology, you probably want an early adopter. Recently, I talked to a company selling eFax solutions, and they actually probably want a mid or late adopter. But depending on what you're selling, having that information gives you a handle into which one of these prospects is more attractive for your solution. Now, I should highlight that the best SDRs do this already. They do it by hand, they do it manually, because in their minds, they have a view of the ideal customer profile. They know who's used the solution in the past, who has the kind of perfect characteristics, and they can hunt through data to figure out technographics. They can read LinkedIn bios to get a sense of what an executive team is like and who might be an early adopter. But it's manual research. And the problem they'd have is something we call the dinner problem, which is that if you can get a prospect to go out to dinner with you and you spend an hour and a half with them, you probably learn everything you need to know to sell something to them. There's two problems. First is they're not going to go to dinner with you, especially not if you're 22 years old, straight out of school. The second problem is if they did, and you spent that hour and a half, 9 times in 10, you're spending time with the wrong prospect anyway. So you invest a ton of time and a ton of money into the wrong prospect to begin with. And that's really what exographics is designed to do, to use those breadcrumbs to help you hone in and find the right prospect to begin with. The important thing that happens next, once you have visibility into exographics, is that ICPs, ideal customer profiles, no longer need to be static things. If you think about how marketers typically create the ICP, or I'm sorry, an ICP, it is a PowerPoint presentation. It gets filed into the sales enablement deck, maybe a rep or an SDR sees it on their first week on the job, and then it's really hard to use that. It's a static item. What AI makes possible is the ability to create a mathematical model of ideal customers using exographic signals. So in this world, what you can do, instead of guessing what the ICP is and putting that down in a static model, what you're able to do is insert into the model your ideal customers. And by the way, you don't need thousands of them. Maybe it's 20 or 30 or 50 ideal customers. And have the AI build a mathematical model. We call that an AICP. Instead of an ICP, it's an artificial intelligence customer profile. And that becomes a living model because it updates itself. It learns over time as you close new deals, as customers churn out, as you get new information about customer satisfaction. And what that can be used for is to find lookalike prospects. It says, here's this living model of my best customers. Now I can dig in and find others who look just like them and save all that time and effort. It's a smarter software model instead of automating stupid.
Jonathan, I want to stop there for 1 second, because I think I just want to highlight two real key elements to what you're saying. So first is, traditionally, it's not that this is impossible to do. It's that it would literally take an unpredictable amount of hours to capture the information at an individual level and have the rep enter that information. So first, you're intelligently automating something that likely just isn't going to happen. The second, though, you mentioned this, and this is the key to understanding artificial intelligence, is a function of AI called machine learning, the primary subset, which is the machine, the software you're using gets smarter. And so again, let's say an SDR actually did this for every prospect and went out and found all this information and put it all in. They still wouldn't be updating what that ICP looks like based on new information that comes in. So as deals start closing, as you can integrate retention information and lifetime value information into the deals that close, you wouldn't be evolving that ICP until someone yanks it out of the deck and goes back and rebuilds it with static data again, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months later. So you have an upfront reduction in cost and increase in efficiency, and you have data intelligence you didn't have before. And then you have a system that learns in real time without sleeping, that continually evolves your knowledge of what that ICP is, and potentially opens up entire new segments or audiences you would otherwise miss. So I think, like, sometimes, to your point about upfront, this idea of demystifying AI, the best way to do it is to show use cases and connect it to business outcomes. And everyone understands cost reduction, increase in efficiency, acceleration of revenue. Like, those are the fundamental reasons why you should buy AI products.
Right. I mean, it is still the big three. It is, efficiency, visibility and control, but now also with smarter built into it. And if you ask what's upstream, for the SDR, it's really targeting. That's what's upstream. And you have two options. The old model, the not super smart model, is to let them guess, and maybe an SDR figures it out. But what AI is amazing at is finding patterns and doing it so much faster. Even if your best people could find some patterns like this, the AI will do it so much faster. And that just saves time. Your people end up spending their time doing engagement and working with customers where they should spend their time, instead of finding things that now the AI can do so much faster, better, cheaper. Where it leads is a model that looks a little like this, which is at all times having the bullseye, having the target of knowing that people in your organization are focused on the sweet spot. And I could go real deep and talk about the way LeadCrunch is enabling this, but I'll stay focused mostly on the AI and the use cases before. But you can see the snapshot of our product and how we're enabling this, for the use of AI in this upstream, who's the next best prospect problem. This is the very short commercial for us. If you're interested, enticed by these concepts, these are some of the other folks we're already working with. They are leaders in B2B, including 7 of the top 10 cloud companies and 6 of the top 10 software companies. So if you're interested in finding out more, certainly hope you'll reach out.
And then our final commercial, again, a reminder that in about Oh my gosh, 8 weeks or 9 weeks. That's terrifying to think about. We have a virtual conference coming up. Marketing AI conference is returning for its second year. There's the URL at the bottom there, along with a promo code. The early bird rate actually goes up after tomorrow. So now would be a great time to do it. And with that, we're going to jump into Q&A. So if you have questions, use the Q&A pane. We have the chat available as well if anybody wants to reach out through that. But Jonathan, you want to stop sharing and you and I can just kind of have a chat. So I'm gonna start because I have a lot of questions. I will watch for other people's questions as well. But so where does the data come from? I want to start there. So it's like, okay, the exographics, where all this information is emerging, that's enabling the AI to find these patterns, to make these predictions, to make recommendations. Where's the data come from?
Yeah, great question. I talked about AI as pattern matching, and AI loves data, as you know very well. In a sense, the more data you have, the better for AI. And our data in particular comes from all those breadcrumbs in this connected environment. It's everything it could possibly get its hands on. But it really starts with the public web, which is companies describing themselves. On everyone's individual website, we have 10 million different company sites, in our database, because companies are describing themselves in important ways. They describe the markets they're in, they describe the customers they serve, and they describe the products they offer. And that's a huge set of signals that lend themselves to exographics. That said, we also add private data sources to that. We purchase data indirectly from LinkedIn, which then adds to the company information with information about the people who work there. And for a signal like early adopters, that becomes really important. It turns out signals like the level of diversity, especially in age or experience diversity on an executive team, turns out to be a really interesting indicator, one of many signals that go into identifying an early adopter.
Which
so if
is,
you take public information,
I was just saying real quick, like that's a key point. Like again, when we think about AI, we think about how do we do this now? Or like, what is the fundamental, and we think about what's known. What AI opens up is the unknown, the things you wouldn't even think about as signals. It finds, and it actually can base recommendations on these things like that I would have never even considered that as an idea of, will this influence the likelihood of them buying something? So, I mean, that's just a fascinating specific example to me.
Yeah, I think when you take this direction of exographics and say, what can we decipher from information, then you start to learn a lot, actually. You start to make a lot of these great inferences. So it comes from, to recap on your question, it comes from public web data, it comes from people information and contact information, also technographic information. And people can also link in their intent information, because intent's a hot topic now. But if you see a space where a lot of people are showing intent, then you can feed that back into the model and say, hey, here's 30 companies that have just shown intent. Go find me 1,000 more just like them based on other exographic signals.
Yep. We've got some questions rolling in, so jump into these. So William was asking, he kind of missed the beginning, but he was assuming this is best for B2B company, not for consumer data. So I know LeadCrunch is focused on B2B, but can you talk to us about B2B and B2C in this approach?
Yeah, good question or observation. It's interesting because in a lot of ways, first of all, this is largely focused on B2B at this point. And if there's applications for B2C, we haven't all thought them all the way through, and it'll be someday long in the future. But in terms of general applicability, in a sense, B2C companies are ahead of B2B in some of these kinds of topics, because in the B2C world, there's long been this idea of psychographics. No great B2C marketer would rely on just demographics, because sometimes age is exactly the right requirement, for some products or services. But a lot more often, and my last company prior to this was a consumer company, we sold footwear. We knew our shopper. Our shopper was a Whole Foods shopper or an Amazon Prime shopper. That's a psychographic rather than a demographic criteria. So in a lot of ways, what we're doing here is using AI to find psychographics for business. And that's what we call exographics. But I think the applicability back on the consumer side is there are some other companies I've come across. I can't think of who they'd be to name them now, but there are companies doing a better and better job of extracting psychographics from consumer information. And obviously we're big fans. I think the more you apply this kind of insight to data, the better our results will be as marketing and salespeople, whether it's B2B or B2C.
Yeah, and I mean, on the B2C side, it's used. Like, I mean, obviously, LeadCrunch hasn't, adapted their platform to do it, but trust me, like all the big brands, all the big tech companies are personalizing at scale in ways that's hard to fathom, with real-time intent data, real-time demographic data, real-time exographic, like it's all being used to target you and make recommendations. So again, as simple as Spotify and Netflix, the way they figure out and recommend music and shows and movies to you. That basic example is happening everywhere. There's I guess we haven't announced this yet, but we just wrote a book on AI, turned the manuscript in a few weeks ago, thanks. And one of the examples we used was Stitch Fix. So I don't use Stitch Fix, but I know it's a popular thing. And what they actually hire astrophysicists to build predictive models of what clothing you're likely to buy. And so they have these geniuses who leave the world of modeling universes and galaxies to come and actually build models of people's preferences for clothing. So it is widely used in many of the consumer brands that you interact with and buy from every day. But like we talked about at the beginning, you just don't know it's there. You just see these Instagram ads that are like insanely targeted at you, and you don't want to click on it because you don't want Instagram to know that they succeeded in targeting you. But it is like down to the T, like exactly what you would buy. That's how that stuff happens. It's powered by AI. Mm-hmm. So, okay. Let's see, talk specific about how does this work without giving away company secrets, the steps your AI is taking. That's a question from Les. It's actually a brilliant question. And Les, I'm going to tell you, we haven't announced this yet either. I'm just going to like drop everything in one webinar unplanned. We're doing what's called an AI in Action series in August and September to watch out for, to do this exact thing. We're actually going to have technology companies teach how their AI works by showing the behind the scenes of the product. So Jonathan, I'm not going to ask you to give away the secrets, but I love this question because it's something that's been on my mind for a while. How does the AI actually do what it does in the product?
Yeah, it really is this concept of pattern matching, but in the extreme, because AI knows how to identify patterns that a human doesn't need to see or the human doesn't need to find in the first place. So the basic insight is to feed a whole bunch of raw data into the system, and then train the system to look for certain kinds of patterns and let more fall out on their own, and then go ahead and adjust to that. So, for example, we might have the concept of early adopter, and we might have some hints that we provide, like diversity of an executive team, but another way to get there is just to feed in example companies that we know are early adopters. And that's actually the primary way that anyone would interact with our system. If you feed in a set of early adopters, the AI can go look at many hundreds or thousands of signals that make up those companies and go find more that are lookalikes to those. And it is in a sense mind-blowing. And I think when you talk about the astrophysicists over at Stitch Fix, here, our astrophysicist equivalent is named Steve Byapour, our chief scientist. He was actually pictured that slide with the robot at the chalkboard. That's actually our guy Steve when he takes off his human suit. But he is he actually, as an aside, he invented the fraud detection that Fair Isaac, FICO, uses for your fraud detection. So you've also already, unknowingly already used his software, a lot of times in your life.
Which I think is again, I don't want to derail you. I want to come back to the end of this answer, but when you think about the future of your company and you think about what does the org chart look like, who are we going to need to staff to do this? That chief data scientist is our chief scientist or whatever it's going to be called. That is a title that is going to exist in every major company. You're going to have these people who look not just within IT or within marketing or sales, but look holistically, horizontally across the entire company and say, how can we be smarter with the collection and use of our data, with the tools we buy and how we apply them, with the way we interact, with the way we protect privacy and security. Like that is an essential role in companies in the future, but right now it mostly exists within tech companies.
Yeah, we could go deep on that because I think, there is this emerging skill of using information, using data. And that's one of the goals, I think, and one of the things that AI makes possible is taking out just these kind of roles that are absolute just guesswork today and up leveling those functions. Because what someone should be thinking about is, hey, what are the patterns that I know about? What are the patterns that the AI is telling me? And what do I learn from that to make the entire organization more effective?
There's a book I always recommend called Prediction Machines. And actually, I'll give you two books to read. So first is Prediction Machines. And in that book, they talk about the future of all work being telling the machine what to predict and then knowing what to do with the predictions. So the machine's going to be there in everything you do, from email marketing to advertising to copywriting to sales enablement, whatever it is. You're going to have to understand what the machine is doing. You don't have to know how to do it, but you're going to have to understand what the machine is doing. And then you're going to have to figure out what to do with those recommendations. The other book I would highly recommend is The Algorithmic Leader by Mike Walsh. And that is the fundamental premise of that book, is that you don't have to become a machine learning engineer. You don't have to be an expert in analytics or data or any of that stuff. But leaders of the future, and really now, have to understand what AI is, how it works, how the recommendations work, so that when you're making decisions, you have to understand that every one of them is going to be influenced by intelligence that you might not grasp where it came from. And so it's just like, it's so critical to get yourself in the mindset of career development. This isn't optional in the future. Like, this is essential to everybody from entry level all the way up to the CMOs, CIOs, whatever it is.
Paul, it's not that different from what we're doing as consumers when we use a tool like Waze or Google Maps to get from point A to point B. We don't know all the features that go into the road recommendation, but we can control some of them. And that's important, right? I may want to avoid tolls, right? I may have carpool, that kind of thing going on. I may also know that the AI prefers to make lots of left and right turns and I prefer to go straight ahead, But knowing enough to choose your route is important. Without needing to know every detail of how it works.
Yep. We've got a ton of questions, so I'm going to try and tackle as many of these as we can. We've still got plenty of time left to do. So if you want to stick around for Q&A, you're welcome to. We'll keep going through these. If you need to drop off at any point, we'll try and summarize all these questions. We're going to send the on-demand, so the video and the transcript of this will be made available on demand to everybody. So that'll probably be posted tomorrow. You'll get an email. And we'll try and again do a follow-up, and maybe Jonathan, we do a follow-up with some of these questions we don't get to, where you can give answers, and we'll do like a blog post and send it to everybody as well. Okay, so I have my usual question about AI education programs. What are 1, 2, 3 steps we would need to turn this from concept into an action? So someone looks at this. Actually, I saw a question here about applying this to like event exhibitors and sponsors. So applications specifically to their business or their role. So if someone sat through this and they're like, oh my gosh, we are totally doing it the manual way, or we're not doing this at all, what steps would they take to take a smarter approach to this?
Yeah, I'd say anytime you're in that challenge where you say, I know some of the right people, but I don't know all the right people, and I'm not even sure the people that I know are the right ones. Like that's when this can make a big difference. And I mean, not to be self-serving, but the steps are pretty straightforward for this particular technology, which is reach out to us. We set up a demo and can show it to you even on your data, because the actual go live is really light here. Previous versions of this kind of thing in the past, and you mentioned lead scoring at the very beginning.
Yeah.
One of the challenges with those is that they required a lot of manual setup and maybe a lot of transactions to even start to get smart.
Yep. And
that's one of the ways that AI has really advanced in the last, even 5 years, where it no longer requires 1,000, of your data points to get smart. Literally, this software can be live for folks, in an hour, an afternoon easily.
Wow.
It's mostly just learning about it, and it needs 20 or 30 data points, not 1,000.
That's actually somebody asked the question about how many signals does it need to do what it does, basically.
Well, behind the scenes, there's many thousands, but actual user inputs, 20-ish.
Wow.
And the beauty is that those thousands are already pre-calculated and pre-processed. We've extracted exographics from millions of data points, and they're all sitting there already, just kind of waiting for you to show up and use them.
We had a really smart question. I love this question. Actually, at our conference coming up, we have a couple sessions and a roundtable dedicated to this topic. But how do you audit for bias, and how frequently is it done? Is it done by independent third parties? And so you can talk obviously specifically to LeadCrunch, but more broad scale to the industry. It's just such a good question because most marketers don't think to ask about the bias that might be inherent in the data or the decisions that might be made by your company, not LeadCrunch, but the buying company, the customer, as a result of data that might be biased that they might not realize.
Oh, it's an awesome question. And I mean, for sure, it's extremely relevant and topical in the AI field in general, especially in situations like hiring. People are using AI for, resume matching and those kinds of use cases where bias is huge. I mean, you're affecting people's career opportunities, for example. To me right now, I think, first of all, I think that's a new topic. And I don't think anyone has an answer where they can just, they've nailed that. I think it's gonna be something we're talking about for the next 5 or 10 years. And I think, Paul, you're probably gonna do a bunch of sessions just on that, over the years is my guess. But I think what it really comes down to is building models with expected inputs and expected outputs. And then assessing the quality. The way we test our stuff is we take known samples. So let's say you have 100 companies and they're all really good. We might feed in 30 of those companies, but hold out the other 70. We call it a holdout test. And what we want to know is that our system finds those 70 that we already knew about. We know they're good. We want to know, we might find 1,000, but we want to make sure those 70 that we knew are good are in there. And so that's the kind of way that we test our models. We do a lot of that kind of testing on every one of our, what we call exographic lenses, to make sure we find the right stuff and don't neglect some stuff that's really important. And that's a common technique, which addresses some of the data quality stuff, but the social aspect of bias is a much deeper part that's probably a longer term topic.
Yeah, literally. I mean, it's so one of our keynotes, Karen Howe, she's doing a talk on responsible AI, and it's a big part of the premise, this ethics, diversity, bias. Like it's just essential that marketers, when they're starting, think about these things. Don't wait 3 years from now after you've already got a dozen AI tools. Like you need a fundamental understanding of these topics and how they're impacted by the technology, because you're going to use data in making decisions and you have to understand where it came from and how it is assessed for things like bias. So again, just a great question. We have one from Kyra that asks about what type of B2B companies is LeadCrunch, and again, this whole concept of applying AI to these functions good for? Is it high price products? Is it services, permissible? I don't know if I'm saying that right. Products. So what are the kinds of products companies that should be thinking about applying this?
It's really all B2B sellers.
Okay.
And if there's some kind of breakout where there's a boundary on our stuff, we haven't really found that yet. Ultimately, will be everyone, that's for sure. I mean, I think in 5 years or 10 years, if people are still using ICPs in a PowerPoint, right, instead of a mathematical model, then it would be sort of ridiculous. It's like today, if you met a head of sales for any B2B company and they manage their pipeline on the back of a napkin, you'd sort of, where you been, buddy? Use Salesforce, use HubSpot, use something. So I think in 5 to 10 years, everyone will be having mathematical models, their ideal customers. That's just the way it's going to go. Yeah. For the current state of our stuff and who we work with, we're very heavy in tech. Yes, we have a lot of software companies, a lot of cybersecurity companies, a lot of hardware companies, networking, but also B2B marketers. A lot of agencies use us. Healthcare, with some really successful relationships with healthcare and med device type companies. So it's pretty much across the board.
A good one here. How does the AI predict when the right time is to contact a prospect? Is that a function, a use case that LeadCrunch includes? Is there another way you could talk about that?
Well, we will be, and I think it sort of gets back to the Tesla analogy. That car is kind of a pretty good actual analogy for what we're doing, because the first thing that the SDR needs especially is a map. It's the point A to point B. Who do I call on next? Who's the next best prospect? That's like the mapping function in the Tesla, like who's the target. Mm-hmm. But the second thing that Tesla's doing, that road avoidance feature, road hazards, that's really a nature of, as the vehicle is interacting with the road, what's it discovering? What's it finding there? And sort of by analogy, what that means is that as that SDR starts doing interaction, now with the AICP, you have a better view of who to contact in the first place. You're more on target. But as you start doing outreach, what you're going to find out is that some approaches work better for some customers some of the time. And industry's tip, someone goes and gives an amazing conference, an amazing webinar at the Marketing AI Institute, and the right people happen to be on the phone, like all of a sudden a whole industry moves. And at that moment, engagement changes. And so being able to monitor and say, hey, you are having better success with this type of engagement, with this AICP, is an important part of the feedback response that we're doing to close the loop. And that's how it will work eventually. We're doing some of that today. It's getting better every month, every year.
Semi-related, explainability. So it's an issue with AI. Again, if you don't know the concept, what often happens is in machine learning, where the machine is kind of figuring out its own rules, sometimes it's hard for the user or even the people who built the initial algorithms to know why it's recommending what it's recommending. So when you use a tool like LeadCrunch, and to an SDR or a marketer, it's giving this information and it's recommending something. Is there explainability? Is there visibility into why it's recommending, which exact signals or factors it found that it's suggesting you that this is a better fit for your ICP?
For sure there is. And that's a great question, because I think people want the result of a more targeted match and a more efficient match, and knowing when to do engagement. But no one's going to be comfortable with a pure black box, and it just happens because the computer says so. I think a lot of us justifiably would be pretty hesitant to those kinds of solutions. But broadly speaking, there's two answers here. One is that the software, when it's doing matching, the AI does tell you, what exographic signals produced the match.
Okay.
So for example, you see a company come up and it says, this is 97% like your best or your ideal customer. Then that's important, but it also says, here are the exographic signals, because it's an early adopter, or because it has a high compliance ratio, like a lot of your other customers. So that's one piece. It tells you why, which, by the way, also becomes input to that engagement process. We know what they care about. Another one, by the way, I haven't mentioned, is growth. It's a high growth company. So this is a high growth company or logo. So those kinds of things will come out and give you a hint. Broadly speaking, that's one answer, is it's in the software.
Yeah.
The second answer is it does take, ultimately some level of expertise for some people. And some people want to dig in and be super hands-on. We also have a services offering around this where we'll help people, especially in the early days, tune AICPs and understand how to interpret them. And so we have an in-house, it's a crack team of experts led by our guy, Travis Carmack, and his team that will sit with folks and help them get AICPs right, especially in the early days. So I think both those things are needed, frankly, in the early days of this stuff.
Awesome. All right, we have a bunch of questions. We're not going to get to all these. I'll do two more quick ones and then we'll kind of wrap. But again, reminder, we'll send the video, we'll send everything to you. It'll be available on demand, and then we'll do a follow on to try and answer the rest of these questions. So I'm not sure I understand this one, but are you seeing any patterns in stalled deals in the funnels of teams using AI?
Mm-hmm. So that's an interesting question. So stalled deals. In our world, that's not something we would look at much, because we focus on that above the funnel zone.
Okay.
So I saw another question in there, which I can sort of touch on and answer both at once, which is, someone asked like another version of how do I get started?
Yeah.
I think the right way gets back to what Paul said, which is think about use case and where is your real problem as a company. If your problem is deals stalled, then there are some other companies out there focusing AI on the bottom of the funnel, saying, what's happening with a stalled deal, because we find that deals move at this certain pace and these other ones are stalled. And that tells you something about your bottom of the funnel. Our focus has been on the area above the funnel, because that's just what our technology is applied at. And there isn't one company today that nails it for the entire funnel, the same way there isn't on that Salesforce automation slide that I showed.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap. I'm just so grateful for the time. And this was such a fascinating conversation. I feel like we can go another hour on the Q&A side. But tell everybody real quick, what's the best way to get a hold of you? Are you a LinkedIn user, Twitter user, or just straight up email?
Hey, you know what? I'm definitely a LinkedIn user. So Jonathan Spear, you can find me on LinkedIn as the Jonathan Spears part of LeapCrunch, or very easy, just js@leapcrunch.ai.
Great. Well, Jonathan, thank you again. And thank you to everybody for being with us today. We'll be in touch soon with the email. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Paul.